This is the next installment of my playthrough of Axis Empires, and we are now in the summer of 1944. So starting on the European map, we go with the Axis strategy reveal, which is V-weapons. And as you can see in the picture here, we have a picture of the V1 rocket, the flying bomb or whatever it was called. And there's a historical note on this strategy card it's a quote from Hitler, where he said, "This weapon will be decisive against Great Britain and make the British willing to make peace." Of course, that didn't turn out to be so, but I do get to roll a die on the directive table, and the German gets one Volkssturm unit as a replacement. And then the German forces launched a counterattack against Belgorod, and the Soviets suffered heavy losses. So that's a setback for the Soviets on the Eastern Front. Then the Allies reveal their strategy. It is Operation Overlord. So this is the historical play for the summer of 44. So the United States places the 6th headquarters and the 15th Infantry Army in the delay box. Then Britain deploys 2 armor and 1 infantry corps to the map. And then the United States places 3 armor and 3 infantry to the map. And after this, the Allies make a landing on Normandy, and they successfully capture Paris. And the picture here shows some of the effects of this. It doesn't show Italy, but at this same turn, Rome fell to the Allies. Then we go to the Soviet Union, and they play their strategy, Operation Bagration. And this is going to be a massive offensive play. And there is a historical quote on this strategy. And it's Stalin, where he said, "A wounded beast that retires to its lair does not cease to be a dangerous beast. To rid our country and the country's allies with us of the danger of enslavement, we must follow hot on the heels of the wounded German beast and finish it off in its own lair." So that's the quote with this strategy, and a large body of reinforcements are received, as is often the case with major operations in the Soviet Union. And then there's an attack launched against the position at Rostov, which has been holding out. And finally, the city falls and the German forces there are eliminated. And you can see in the picture, the Rostov is not only captured by the Soviet Second Guard, I think is what that is, but the whole southern flank is seriously compromised near Stalino and that area. There were further attacks too in the area shown in this picture in the center and the north, and there are more Soviet gains from these attacks. Of course, both sides are suffering casualties, but the Soviets are winning the war of attrition here, and the Germans are being forced back west. Now we're going to go over to the Daisenso map, starting with May and June of 1944 there. So as the summer of 1944 gets kicked off in May, the Victory Point track is the same here. It remains at Rising Sun, 1 victory point. So the Japanese government reveals the Imperial Directive Naval Projects as their strategy. So they get to roll a die against the political events table. And in this case, the naval project is a success, and the armored carriers are indeed completed. Then we go to the Allies. They reveal their strategy, Operation Forager. So historically, that was the campaign to reconquer Guam and Saipan. So as you can see in the picture, the United States launches an attack against the Japanese forces in Saipan. And the Imperial Japanese Navy does try to intervene, but it's all to no avail. Saipan does have a strong defense unit, as you can see depicted in the picture, which was dug in. And so this attack does weaken them, but does not take them out. It doesn't conquer them. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. In the next picture, you can see the Commonwealth are launching an attack in Malaya against Singapore. There is a weakened unit that is continuing to hold out here in Singapore, and as you would expect, the position is untenable, and the Japanese are defeated, and Singapore falls to the British. Then the Soviet Union reveals their strategy for the Pacific map. It is Chinese insurgency. So this is allowing them to roll on the table to see if they can weaken the Japanese indirectly through promoting insurgency. So I rolled on a table, and the result was no effect. The struggle continues. So that's how that went. We now go back to the European map for June and July of 1944. And the Axis is continuing with his same strategy on the weapons, and they get to roll on the directive table. This time they get a mandated offensive. So that may not be what they wanted to do, but you know, the high command is saying a counterattack. So the Germans do launch a counterattack on the Eastern Front, and it does destroy a Soviet army that had been somewhat overextended. So that worked out quite well. But other than that, the Axis forces on the Eastern Front started to fall back, and you can see again in this picture, it shows how the Southern Front is compromised. Going to the Allies part of the turn, the Britain and America combined to launch further attacks in Italy. And I don't have a picture of this, but they already captured Rome. And but as was historically the case, the attacks in Italy are very costly. The terrain is terrible, but they do manage to push German forces back into Bologna. Also, more forces land in Normandy, and the British troops make a landing also in Norway, in Narvik, which is captured as a result. And then finally on the Eastern Front, the Russians launch a counterattack and push the German lines further west, as is what the plan is with Bagration. And the Axis fall all the way back to the Dnieper and Dnieper rivers. And you can see that in the picture depicted here, how they have a very weak defense line here in Ukraine on the Dnieper River. Also not shown in the picture here is the Finnish army, who is on the Axis side, ends up losing 2 steps of forces in the battle. So that's June and July of 1944 in Europe. Now we're going to go to the Pacific. As we remember, the Japanese strategy is naval programs, and they are successfully able to implement the development of suicide raiders. The question is, are they going to be available on time? We'll have to see. There are some slight defensive moves, but the central region is basically is affected because of mud conditions, so we're not going to do very much. However, in the Allied part of the turn, the United States resumes its attack on Saipan, and as you can see in the picture, it finally does succumb. So U.S. troops move in via transport to Saipan and truck, and you can see Guam is also occupied here. The Soviets are continuing to support Chinese insurgency, and they roll on the political table, and again, they get the result. The struggle continues. So that brings the June-July turn in the Pacific to an end. So we're going to go to July and August and back on the European map. So the Axis is rolling on their V weapons program, and they get another mandated offensive, which they launch against the Soviet Union, and they end up losing a panzer unit. Then overall, the forces on the Eastern Front fall back again, and there are no other major attacks. But I do have forces shifting to the west, as would be expected. The Western Allies land more troops in France and in Norway. And then in Italy, the British and the American forces push the Axis out of both Bologna and Genoa. And it's not without casualties, but it's progress. And then the Commonwealth Army captures Brussels. So things are starting to really fall apart for the Axis. And then on the Eastern Front, with the Soviet turn, the offensive continues, and this time Sevastopol falls under a heavy attack by the 1st Belarusian Army, and the German South Army is heavily damaged from this, and it is defending the city of, how do I pronounce this? Dnepropetrovsk. And then in the same period of combat, Kiev finally falls to the Soviet Union. And we're going to finish out the summer of 1944 by going back to the Pacific map for July and August. So the Japanese are still using their naval program, and they make a die roll on the political events table, and this time they get a cabinet crisis, and it leads to a supply failure in China. So that's not really helpful for the Japanese player. Then the United States launches an attack against the fortified island of Palau in the Western Carolines, and you can see in the picture here that the Americans have little naval resistance at this time, and a carrier strike is performed in support of the land combat, and the island of Palau is captured by the Americans. Finally, the Soviet player makes his last roll on the Chinese insurgency table, and for the 3rd time, they get the struggle continues. So nothing really happened. So that brings the summer of 1944 to a close. If you'd like to see what happens in the autumn of 1944, stay tuned for the next video. Thank you and have a great day.